today you're going to learn everything you need to know regarding handling events in React.js. We're going to discuss what events are, how they work, how to create different handlers for events, the best way to create those handlers. We're going to discuss passing event handlers as props and a bunch more stuff regarding handling events in React. So I've created this website here. This is just for example purposes to show you some examples of handling events here. So you can find the final code linked down below. But to start us off, what even is an event? Well, this isn't really a React thing. It's more so a web dev thing just in general. But an event represents some sort of user action. So what I mean by that is, say a user clicks on this button here, or they type in this input here, or they even hover over this input, or they fill out this form and then they press submit. All of those are considered different events that the user takes. And when writing code, you can respond to those events. So a user clicks on this button. What do you want the next step to be? Or what do you want the resulting action to be? For example, they might click on this button and you might navigate them to a different page. Or they might submit this form and you might want to save their form data in your database. Or you might want to send them a confirmation email. That would be you as a programmer writing code to respond to these different user events. So that's generally what events are, but how do they kind of work in a React context? Well, it's going to be very similar to just a JavaScript context in general. So what I'm going to do is we're going to head over to our code base here in VS Code, and I've created this events page here, and it's exactly what you see on the page. I have a button here that says click me. You see this button here that says click me. I have an input here that says type something. I have an input here that says type something. And then we have our form below our input right here. And then we have our form right here. So this is the code for the page that we're seeing here on localhost 3000 here. So the way that you can handle these events, we're going to focus on the button first, and then I'll show you the input and form, because these are probably the most popular events, although, there's a ton of different web events that you can handle, but it's all going to kind of follow similar concepts. So this should help you out for really handling any events. And I'm going to make sure to just close my application folders here, just so we have a little bit more screen real estate. But in order to handle event, you're likely going to pass some sort of prop to the element that you want to handle the event on. So in the case of this button here, this is the element we want to handle an event on. And the event that we want to handle is an on-click event. Now, here you can see us passing this attribute to this element on click. In HTML, this is going to look like on click. You can see in React, it's actually going to be on and then capital C for click. And that's going to be for most of your events. It's going to be on change instead of all lowercase on change. And that is just how React handles attributes compared to HTML, to have some sort of differentiation between those, similar to how it's class name instead of just class. All right, so you're going to pass some sort of event handler attribute to the element that you want to handle that event on. So in the case of a button, we're passing an on-click attribute, and then we're setting that equal to a reference to a function. So we're basically going to pass a function here that is going to tell React, this is what we want to do when the user clicks on this button. So if we look at our handle button click function, you can see it's right here. We define this const handle button click, and it's a function that calls an alert that says button clicked. So when they click on this button, you should see an alert called button clicked. So if I try this and I click on it, you see an alert that says button clicked. So what we're doing here is we're passing an on-click attribute to where when the user has the event of clicking on this button, we're going to pass a reference to a function, and that's going to run the code for that function. So it's going to be alert button clicked. Now you could, of course, change this This could be a console.log button click. And if we open up our console here, and now I click on the button, you see I get button clicked over here, just to show you that whatever we put within this handle button click function is the code that's going to run when the user clicks on this button. An important distinction here is that we pass a reference to a function. We don't call a function itself right here. So we're not calling the handle button click function immediately, because that's going to then run this function every time this component renders, rather than only running this function when the user actually clicks on this button, which is what we want. So make sure to pass a reference to a function. Now, you don't need to define the function outside of the attribute itself. We could pass an inline function here, like so, an anonymous inline function that just console.logs, this button was clicked, and we are handling it within an inline function. So this time around, we're still passing a reference to a function here, because we're not just like immediately calling this console.log. We're passing an inline reference to a function that's going to console log this. So if we come back, I'm going to open the console again, and then I click it. We see this button was clicked, and we're handling it within an inline function. So you can either handle your events by passing an inline function right within the attribute itself, or you can define your handler function outside of the attribute itself. Now, my preference is if it's something that's super small like this, I'll just pass it as an inline function. And it'll just be a quick inline function, and I think it's plenty readable and is a fine thing to do. But say you have a lot of code that you write within this handle button click, and it's like some complex logic in here, I wouldn't try to put that all within the return statement and in the attribute as an inline function here. I would definitely pull that out into its own handler function. I think that's a much better idea to do. So if it's just like a simple single line, I would pass it as an anonymous function. But anything much more than that, I would create a whole separate function like we did here, and then pass the reference of that function in to the event handler attribute here. So for this button, that's how you can handle on clicks. Now, a very similar thing we would do for an input. So an input, most of the time you're going to care about the on change event. So when the user starts typing into this input, you're probably going to care about what values are changing in that input as the user is typing. So to handle that, you can use the on change attribute. And like I said before, there are several different on attributes: on change, on click, on hover, on mouse in, on mouse, leave, a ton of different attributes that you can just Google search and find if you need to handle a certain user action. But here we're going to handle the on change, and we do the same thing. We pass a reference to the function, like so, our handle input change, and then we write some code for what we want to do with that kind of event that the user takes, or the action the user takes. So earlier with a button, we didn't really worry about the event object. So in just web development, automatically when you pass these event handlers, you're going to be passed an event object that represents the user event. So in our handle input change, right now it has an alert, but I don't necessarily want to do that right now. Let's just console.log input value is changed to this, but let's also console.log the event. And you can see I am passing a object here to the console.log statement. And the reason I like doing this is because, so I'm passing an object where the event property is equal to the event that we're automatically going to be passed from the browser here to our handle input change. So we pass a reference to the function, and then we're automatically from the browser going to get the event from this on change. And it's going to be an object representing whatever user action took place. So it's going to automatically going to be passed here, and then we're just going to console log that. And the reason I like to do it within a object here, like I was saying earlier, is because it gives me a label for the event. So we're going to see in the console an object where the event property is E. So if you're console logging several things, I might do another console log to see like some other value. So some other value, and then I'll set this to that value so you can have like a nice readable console log statement. But let's go ahead and change this input and see what happens. So I'm going to open the console again. And when I start typing into this event, you see that we get a synthetic base event. So this is basically React wrapping the just browser event here to kind of give you some other things. But for our purposes here, just know that the browser is going to automatically pass this event object that is going to have several different properties on it that are going to allow you to better handle that event. So in our case, you can see in our other console log statement, we are saying input value change to event.target.value. That is basically how we can get the value of the input, because the event.target is going to represent the element in which the event occurred on. So in our case, that's going to be this input right here. And the value is going to be the current value of this input. So if we come back, we see input value changed to RGF. So what was it here? But I'm going to say some value here, and you can see input value changed to some value. And on the event that we console log that is passed to us automatically, if we go down to the event.target, and then we look at the value here, you see it's a string that says some value. And you can see there's a whole bunch of other different attributes that you could use that are potentially useful on your event objects that allow you to best handle these user events. In a click event, we didn't use it, but just know that on this handle button click, we could also accept an event here, and then I could console.log, and this time around, I'm going to say button click, and it's going to point to this event. So if we click, I'm going to clear this. Let's click on the button, and you see button click is going to be a synthetic base event that React gives us wrapping around the actual event. But you can see it gives us an event object where the type is click. The target is going to be our button this time because the element that was clicked or the element that we're handling that event on is this button here. So that's going to be our event.target. And then if I open up this target, you can see a whole bunch of different information about the button element itself. And you can see the inner text is click me, just like what it is here. So you're automatically passed an event to the function you reference. So this would be like the same thing is if we passed an inline function, it would accept this button event. And then we could just console.log the button event, because we're automatically going to be passed as an argument to the function that we pass as an event handler, an event. So now if I click it again and I scroll down here, we see a button event right here that represents our handle click event. Now let's move to the form element here. So for our form, we see handle form submit. We have a button of type submit, which is going to trigger our on submit of our form. So this is more so HTML stuff rather than React stuff. But on a form, one way to handle the submission of a form is to set a button as type submit, which is going to trigger whatever function you reference in your on submit of your form. So when this button is clicked of type submit right here, when this button is clicked, it's going to trigger this on submit attribute that we pass as a handle form submit function. So if we go to our handle form submit, we see that first we call event.prevent default. This is also more so just a basic web thing, not really React thing, but we want to prevent a default submission of this form, making a network request. So we're going to prevent the default behavior of this event. So we're using that event object that I just told you about earlier that is automatically passed to handle form event. We're going to get this event object. We're going to prevent the default. Then we're going to create some new form data based on the event.target. So the event.target in this case is going to be our form element here, because the form element is what we handle this onSubmit attribute. So the user clicks submit, and the target is going to be the form. We're going to create some new form data based on, we get this out of the box for free here in our environment, in our JavaScript environment. So we create a new form here, and then we just alert form submitted with name, which is going to be the form data.get name, and then the email, which is form data.get email. So when we create this new form data based on our event.target or our HTML form, it's going to give us these .get methods to get the name and email from our form, which are going to be accessible or input right here that has these email attributes, and same thing with our input here that has these name attributes. So if we test this out, I'm going to say my name is Ryan, email at email.com, and then I'm going to click submit. And we see we get an alert saying form submitted with name Ryan and email at email.com. So that looks like it's working correctly here. We call our handle form submit. We take the values from our email and name inputs. We alert them right here with our form data.get name and .get email. Now, one other thing I want to cover before we wrap up here is it's very common to pass event handlers as props. So I'm going to create a different component here. And if you see this use client up here, it's just I'm technically in a Next.js environment right now, but use client makes this be just basic React.js. So don't worry about that. That's nothing specific to React. It's more of a Next.js thing. But I'm going to create a new component here that's function button, and it's going to take a handle click prop, and then this button is just going to return the same button that we have right here. But I'm going to copy and paste that within the return statement. But instead of passing an inline function here, we're just going to call the handle click prop for our button component. So we just created this button component, and now we can use it here instead. So I'm going to use our button component, but then I need to pass a handle click to this button, and I'll just pass our handle button click. So this is just to show you that if you have a component that you want to have some sort of event handler, it's very common to define that event handler in a parent component and then pass that down to the child component. That's perfectly okay to do. So if our handle click here, we assign it to our reference, our handle button click function. And then within our button component, it should use our handle click prop and use it right here on our button's on click attribute. So if we test our button again, let me clear the console, we see it's still console logging what we would expect. So it's perfectly fine to pass event handlers from parent to child. I think that covers about everything I wanted to cover here when it comes to events in React. Of course, there's always more that you can know, but I think these are some really good core concepts. And these are also like the main events that you're probably going to handle. Click events for buttons, change events for inputs, and submit events for forms. Those are going to be like the bread and butter of the events that you handle. So just to recap here, to handle events in React, you're going to pass some sort of on event handler to an element. So on change, on click, on hover, on submit, something like that. And then to handle that, you're going to pass as almost as like a prop or as the value to the attribute, you're going to pass a reference to a function. And it can be a function that you define externally, like we do here, and then pass it into the attribute, or it can be an inline function like so. Either way, whether it's an inline function or an external function you define, you're automatically going to be passed an event object that is going to better allow you to handle that event. And one major value you're going to use is the event.target, which the target represents the element that event occurred on. So in our case, it would be this input right here, would be the event.target. And then in input, you can get the event.target.value to represent the current value that's in the input. And if it was an inline function, you'd accept the event right inline like so, and then use that within the body of the function. If the event has some sort of default behavior, like a form submission, you can call the event.preventDefault to prevent the default behavior. Very common to see that with form submissions. And then it's also perfectly acceptable to create an event in a parent component and then pass that down into a child component, like what we do here with defining this handle button click, passing it into our button component that we created, and then using that within the on click of the button returned from this button component. So hopefully that helps you understand events in React. Let me know if you have any questions below, and I will see you in that next one.